This is Living Power with Dan Hurst.
In John chapter 10, Jesus is, we just studied about him healing this blind man, and now he's continuing on in his ministry, and he begins to say some things. Now he's getting into some real interesting teaching, and he's saying some things and challenging the Pharisees and Sadducees, but also just the folks who weren't necessarily religious leaders, but just needed to know what the Word said and what God's plans were for their lives. And so he says some things in this particular passage, these first 6 verses, that one thing in particular that I want us to key in on today. So let's take a look at those first 6 verses. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. The stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. Now, here Jesus introduces one of the most critical elements in a relationship with God. That relationship with God is a reciprocal relationship. He knows the sheep, and the sheep know the shepherd. They know his voice, they know his touch, they know his compassion, they know his love, they know his discipline. There is this mutual relationship with each other. We experience that leading every day. When we understand that we are sheep in God's fold, and he is that shepherd in our lives, then and what that relationship is all about, it will set that relationship on fire. And that's what I hope over the next few weeks we'll begin to see, what this is teaching. What is that relationship really like? How is your relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ? Is it something that is so powerful and intimate and life-changing, or is it just something that you do because it's just something you've done all your life? And you come to church because it's just a kind of a habit. And you like what's going on at church and you feel good about it, but what about your relationship with the shepherd? The good shepherd has a special relationship with his sheep. Most shepherds, by the way, in that time didn't have a lot of sheep. To have 100 was considered to be huge. Most flocks were maybe 10, 20 sheep. And that shepherd poured himself really into a relationship with the sheep. As silly as that sounds, it was important because it was how he provided for the sheep. It was how he took care of the sheep. And he needed to know his sheep. He needed to know them well. A shepherd, by the way, was considered kind of the low end of the spectrum. If you were a shepherd, on the food chain, you were just below a carrot. You didn't really amount to much as far as society was concerned. You were just kind of the dregs. You were a shepherd and you didn't have any social skills, and most of them didn't. And you weren't really connected, and you didn't really have any influence. You were just kind of a nobody. But you were incredibly important to that society because they needed sheep. And sheep was very important not only for food, but it was used for sacrificial purposes. It played into their religion. Sheep was an important part of that society. So the shepherd played an important role, even though the shepherd wasn't considered to be very, very important. Now, but the shepherd did have a special relationship with the sheep because he was with the sheep 24/7. He was always with the sheep. And that there wasn't anything about the sheep that the shepherd didn't know. I mean, to most of us, we look at a flock of sheep and they all look the same. They're sheep. So what? But to the shepherd knew them all. He knew them. He could tell them apart because they're little markings, little peculiar traits that they had. And you see, as a shepherd, in order to know the sheep and to care for them, you needed to know those things. You needed to know if there were these 2 sheep that didn't get along too well, or you needed to know if there was a sheep that tended to go off in a strange direction on its own. And they did that. They all have their own little silly things. Now Jesus came from heaven to earth to be close to his sheep, to spend time with his sheep so that he could get to know them. And he knows us that way. By the way, Greg, could you turn this down? It's kind of booming or something. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's not, but it's. Thank you, sir. The shepherd, as Jesus indicates himself as the shepherd, he was saying something about his relationship with the sheep that they understood. It made sense to them because they knew what a shepherd was like. They knew what a shepherd did with the sheep and how he tied himself to them and raised them and provided for them and took care of them and did all of those things that needed to be done to protect the sheep. And so when he refers to himself as a shepherd, a good shepherd, what he's saying is, I have a relationship with my sheep. So Jesus, who knows all of these peculiar relationship or traits that you have and what it is that makes you the individual that you are, and still he values you as part of his flock, and he watches over you with love and concern, says something about his relationship with you that you need to pick up on. And that's what we want to kind of look at today. And that is, in verse 3, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out.
On behalf of Dan Hurst and the Open Class, we want to thank you for watching. We hope it was a blessing.